Okay, so we're in the sixth sim of the Shagas Aryeh. I think it's kedai to go over just real quickly everything we've done so far, because sometimes when you learn and you learn more and you learn more, and if you don't have a good handle on what you've already learned, so then you feel like you're just moving on a treadmill. So it's always good to go over just a little bit, and we'll try to do it every once in a while, just to go through what we saw already. In the first siman, we saw a machlokas amaram, whether Kriya Shema is D'Oraisa D'Rabanan. The Shagas Aryeh explained that even the sheet that holds Kriya Shema as D'Rabanan, what that means is that there is a Chiyav D'Oraisa to say something, but it's not specified in the Torah which parsha you have to say. And the fact that we say Parshas Shema and V'hayim Shemoah, that is what's D'Rabanan, according to the sheet that holds D'Rabanan. The other sheet holds D'Oraisa, which we in fact hold like. And then in Sim Beis he discussed, according to that shita, that we hold like that Kriya Shema D'Oraisa means that we are mandated by the Torah to say specific parsha. Which specific parsha do we have to say? We had three shitas. You have to say only the first pasuk, the first parsha, or the first two parshios. And the first two parshios, that was the shita of the Pri Chadash, which the Shagas Aryeh dealt with extensively, and the Shagas Aryeh's maskana was to disagree and say only the first parsha is D'Oraisa. Siman Gimel we discussed about a person that says Kriya Shema while it's still day, and he came out the halacha like most of the Rishonim that hold you're not yotzei if you say Kriya Shema before Tzeitzah L'chavim, and therefore if you daven Ma'ariv early you have to say Kriya Shema again. And he also went to explain that you need to say all three parshas again after Tzeitzah L'chavim. In the fourth siman, he discussed Kriya Shema Shel Arvis after Chatzos Halayla. There's a machlokes Chacham and Rabbi Gamliel, and it was a question how to understand that machlokes. Do the Chacham say L'chachila, you have to say Kriya Shema before Chatzos, but according to Rabbi Gamliel, you can say it after Chatzos even L'chachila, or do the Chacham say that after Chatzos Chazal uprooted your mitzvah of Kriya Shema completely, even B'diavad, and Rabbi Gamliel says B'diavad you could say after Chatzos, but L'chachila not, and the Shagas Aryeh paskin like the first understanding, and he passed like Rabbi Gamliel, so that even L'chachila you could say Kriya Shema after Chatzos Halayla. We explained that L'halacha or Machmer in this, but the Shagas Aryeh came out to be Mekel, and in Siman Hey, we spoke about Sof Zman Kriya Shema Shel Shacharis, which we say is until 3 hours, that until the end of the third hour, or until the beginning of the third hour, and the Shagas Aryeh's conclusion was it was until the end of the third hour. So it was just a quick recap of everything we've done so far, and now we're going to get into our sugya tonight, which is discussing whether a person that cannot speak, can he, or does he have a chiyuv of Kriya Shema, and how would he be able to be yotzei his chiyuv? So we're going to discuss two possibilities of how he could be yotzei his chiyuv. The first is going to be by thinking Kriya Shema, and that's referred to in the Gemara as hir hor kedibur dami, is thinking the same thing as speaking. And the second option we'll discuss is shomea ka'ona, if he hears someone else say Kriya Shema, so that's as if he himself said Kriya Shema. So those are the two ideas we'll be discussing tonight. Let's first talk about hir kedibur dami, which is in fact a Gemara in Barachos Daf Chaf Amud Beis in the first Maramakom Mishnah. Balkari mahar belibo ve'inu mevarich lo l'fanevo la'achraha. A balkari is that specific type of tumah is not allowed to say divrei Torah according to some shitas, and therefore he can't say Kriya Shema. He has to think Kriya Shema, and he doesn't say the brachos at all. On food, he makes the bracha achrona, which is a d'oraisa, but he doesn't make the bracha rishona. And Rabbi Yehuda says, you make the brachos before and after. So the Gemara explains, Amar Ravina, Zosomeres, what we see from our Mishnah, hir hor kedibur dami, that thinking Kriya Shema is the same thing as saying it, at least on a d'oraisa level, at least that you could be yotzei d'oraisa. D'isal kedaitach lav kedibur dami, if it's not like speaking, lama maharher, why would the balkari think Kriya Shema if it's not accomplishing anything? Elamai, so the Gemara says, answers back to Ravina, what do you think? Here at kedibur dami, that thinking is the same thing as speaking? Yotzei b'sfasov, then why doesn't he just say it? And if there's some issue with him saying Kriya Shema, and thinking is the same thing as saying, and he's allowed to think it, so then there shouldn't be any issue for him to say it either. So the Gemara answers, Kid'ashchem b'sinai. It's the Isser of the Baal Keri to say words of Torah is like that which we found at Har Sinai, where there were words of Torah spoken, not just thought, and therefore the only Isser for the Baal Keri are spoken words of Torah, but not thought words of Torah. But that specific, that distinction between thinking and speaking is only in regards to what a Baal Keri is allowed to do. But in regards to the Chiyuv of Kriya Shema, there's no difference. And therefore, this Baal Keri, who's not supposed to be saying words of Torah, but could think words of Torah, certainly could be Yotzei Kriya Shema by thinking. Because that's a perfectly valid way of saying Kriya Shema. That's the opinion of Ravina. Rav Chisda Amar, Rav Chisda says, hear her lav kedibur dami, that thinking is not the same as speaking. Disal kedaita hear kedibur dami, if it was the same thing as speaking, Yotzei B'svasav, so then he should just say Kriya Shema, which was our question of Ravina. And the Gemara asks back, Elamai hear her lav kedibur dami, so what do you think? That thinking the words of Kriya Shema is not like saying them? Lama mahar, so then why would the Baal Keri think the words of Kriya Shema? What's he accomplishing with that if he's not Yotzei the mitzvah? Amar Rabbi Elazar, so Rabbi Elazar says, Kadesh lo yehu kol olam oskin bo, v'hu yoshiv batal. So we just don't want that everyone else is saying Kriya Shema and he's going to be sitting and doing nothing. That's what we don't want him to do. But he's not Yotzei the mitzvah, it's just we want to keep him busy doing something together with the tzibur. The Nigros Pirkei Achrinos, so why doesn't he just learn a different parak? We want him to be involved in that same thing that the tzibur is being osek in. So we have two shitas. The shita of Ravina, which says that you can be Yotzei Kriya Shema by thinking it, and we have the shita of Rav Chisda that says you cannot be Yotzei the Kriya Shema by thinking it, and all of the paskin like Rav Chisda, and one of those is Tosfos, which we actually have here in this first Maramakom on the side. Rav Chisda Amar, Lav Kedibur Dami, Rabbeinu Chananel Pirish, Halacha Rav Chisda. Rabbeinu Chananel paskins like Rav Chisda, that thinking, you can't be Yotzei Kriya Shema by thinking. Kinemitarsi Rav Ada Rav Elazar Lemilse. Since Rav Ada and Rav Elazar explain Rav Chisda's words, Shma Mina Kavasi Kaimi, we see they hold like him, right? If you saw in the Gemara, where we said Rav Chisda said, here Lav Kedibur, and then we explain, so why is he thinking it? Amar Rabbi Elazar explains, and then we explain, so why doesn't he think about a different parak? Amar Rav Ada bar Ava explains, these are different Amoram explaining the shita of Rav Chisda, which implies those Amoram also hold like Rav Chisda, which would make him the shita of the Rabbim, and the halacha would be like him. Below Yotzei b'Kriya Shema b'Hira, and therefore you're not Yotzei by thinking. There's another raya that you can't be Yotzei by thinking from a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Nun Amud Aleph, which is the second Maramakom Beis, and it says over there, we're going to see that there's a big difference between thinking and speaking when it comes to a completely different halacha, but the common denominator should be the same. That Tanya says in the Brisa, Lo Yomer Avan L'Chaveira Hanira Shetamud Imi L'Erev, a person should not tell his friend, do you think you'll be able to come to me tonight? And he's not specifying that he wants the person to do work for him, which would be usher to speak about on Shabbos. He just says, you'll come tonight. He doesn't say to do what. It's understood that he wants him to do work. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, Omer Adam L'Chaveira Hanir Shetamani Milar. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says you are allowed to say that. So it's a machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. The Psach Halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, that is permitted. But Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my time Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, and he explains the reason Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, the Chsiv is the pasuk writes, Mimso chefsecha v'daber davar, that on Shabbos we have to refrain from taking care of your needs, and to speak out things that you need to work on during the week. And we learn from that pasuk, Dibur Asar, hear her mutter. Only speaking is Asar. Thinking is mutter. So we see is when the pasuk uses the word davar, or daber, to speak, it means specifically speaking and not thinking. If that's the way we hold in Shabbos, so then when we go back to Kriya Shema, where it says v'dibarta bam, they have to say the words of Kriya Shema, so again, we would say that means you have to say them with your mouth, and you can't just think them. Right? This machlokus in brachos seems to be connected to the machlokus Tanoim in Shabbos, and we paskin in Shabbos, it's clearly passing in the Gemara that we hold thinking is not the same as speaking. So the same thing would apply by Kriya Shema as well. Now, there's an interesting Rambam in Hilchos Brachos, Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin, which is Maramakum Gimel, and he says as follows: Kol habrachos kulan sarech sheyashmiya la'azno mashu omer. All of the brachos, you have to hear what you're saying. If you don't hear, you're still yotzei. And it doesn't make a difference whether you actually say it or you just think it. So according to the Rambam, you could be yotzei all the brachos by thinking them, even though you don't say the bracha at all. Now, the Rambam is clearly saying that thinking is the same thing as speaking. However, the Shagat points out, you can't necessarily bring a proof from that which the Rambam says about brachos to the din of Kriya Shema, because Kriya Shema says in the pasuk you have to say it. It doesn't say in the pasuk you have to say brachos. Chazal instituted brachos, and perhaps they didn't say you have to say them at all. And therefore, thinking, you're also yotzei, not because thinking is the same thing as speaking, but because Chazal never required you to say it. As opposed to Kriya Shema, where the Torah says you have to speak it, v'dibarta bam, so then even the Rambam would agree that you have to say it and you can't just think it. He points out that the other poskim disagree with the Rambam, and they hold that even by brachos you have to speak it. And so the Rambam is the most mekel shita, and he holds that you could think brachos, you don't have to say the brachos, but it would seem, the way the Shagat is explaining, that it's specific to brachos, it's not referring to Kriya Shema. Now it's interesting that the Shagas Aryeh here writes, and he writes this twice in this image. First time I saw him write this, he says this idea that all the poskim disagree with the Rambam, that even by brachos you have to say it out. He doesn't bring any rayas here. He says he explained it already in his Sefer Klolei Torah Mitzvos. We don't have a Sefer Klolei Torah Mitzvos of the Shagas Aryeh. Unfortunately, that was lost. Someone actually looked it up for me, and he said he saw written that many of the Shagas Aryeh's works were lost in a fire. We have actually very few of his works. We have the Shagas Aryeh, which is really only like the first volume of the Shagas Aryeh. There was at least one more volume, it seems. Plus he had Svarim on all Shas, which we spoke about before. We only have a few Svarim, 2 Svarim on the end of Moed, 2 Svarim that each one has 3 small Masechtas at the end of Moed. That's all we have, 3 Svarim from the Shagas Aryeh. But he's constantly quoting other Svarim that he wrote that we don't have anymore. But you can bring a proof to the fact that you have this chilek between brachos and Kriya Shema from the Rambam, what he says by Hilchos Kriya Shema. In Hilchos Kriya Shema, Perek Beis Halacha Ches, which is Os Daled in the Maramakomos, he says, V'tzarech lashmiel la'azno kishu karei. You have to hear when you say Kriya Shema. V'im lo yishmiel la'azno yatsa. If you didn't hear what you said, you're still yotzei. But he doesn't continue the way he continued in Hilchos Brachos to say, Bein shehotzei b'svasav, Bein she amar b'libo. He leaves that part off. Right, so it seems like it's specific to brachos that you have the ability of thinking it. By Kriya Shema, you don't necessarily have to say it loud enough that you could hear it, but say it you do have to do. You cannot just think it. So that takes care of the chelek of discussing whether a person who is mute can be yotzei Kriya Shema by thinking it. Seems clearly not. Now, of course, if we find no way that the mute person can be yotzei Kriya Shema, so he's not going to be chayiv. But this first method of thinking Kriya Shema is not a valid way of being yotzei Kriya Shema lahalacha. Right? It could be Ravina would hold you could do it, but lahalacha, we don't consider that a valid way of being yotzei Kriya Shema. Now the second possibility we'll be discussing is shomea ka'ona. If you hear someone else saying something, so it's as if you said it yourself. A mute person can hear. We're not talking about a person who's deaf. He could hear someone else saying Kriya Shema, so perhaps he could be yotzei in that way. Now, the Shagas Aryeh brings a Shibbolei Leket, who says, from here it's clear that he would not be able to be yotzei with shomea ka'ona. He says like this in the 5th Maramakom Hey, which is a Shibbolei Leket, which was one of the Rishonim in Klal Aleph Siman Tes. B'mispal v'shama Kaddish or Kedusha. If a person is in the middle of davening, and he hears Kaddish or Kedusha, De'ika miravasa desfir leisha shosek v'yishma. There are some Rabbanim that hold he should stop in the middle of his davening and listen to the Kaddish or the Kedusha. De'kaimelan shemei kona, and he could be yotzei just by listening. Sherav Avram bar Shlomo Kasav, Rav Avram bar Shlomo, he writes, Heicham rinan shamav lo anu yatsa. In what situation do we say if a person hears something but doesn't say it, he's yotzei? B'machum shiachal lanos kahanach tasukah. Only in situations where he could say it himself, but instead he's choosing to listen to it, like the cases that are spoken about in Maseches Sukkah, Daf Lamed Ches. Aval ha'omein b'tfila she'enu yachal lanos lo yatsa b'shmiya. But if he's davening, and he's not allowed to answer Kaddish and Kedusha because he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, so then he can't be Yotzei by listening either. Domi, the Rabbi Zera, similar to what Rabbi Zera says, Da'amar kol haroy lebila ein bila ma'kevesbo, v'chol she'in roy lebila bila ma'kevesbo. This is a statement which is used around Shas, and it's Rabbi Zera's famous statement that he says about a carbon mincha. A carbon mincha, supposed to place oil in it and mix it together. Mix the oil into the mincha, into the flour. If you didn't mix it in, you're still yotzei. However, if you brought a mincha that was so large, which Chazal determined to be 60 esronim, so if you bring that amount of flour, more than that amount of flour, we consider it's too large to mix the oil in, and therefore you're not yotzei at all. Even though I don't have to mix it, but it has to be a situation where if I wanted to mix it, I could. The Torah says to mix it, and we say it's only lichachila, but it has to be a situation where if I wanted to mix it, I could. So if I bring a mincha in a situation where it's impossible for me to mix it, then I'm not yotzei at all. That's the statement of Rabbi Zera, and we apply this statement of Rabbi Zera all over Shas, in many different circumstances. So the way the Shiboya Leket is applying it over here is if a person's in the middle of a davening and therefore he cannot answer Kaddish and Kedusha, he also is not going to be able to be Yotzei just by hearing someone else. Right? Normally you don't have to say it yourself, you could just listen. But you have to at least be in a situation where you could say it. Similar to the case of the mincha, where I don't have to mix the mincha, but it has to be a situation where I could mix it. However, the Shagas Aryeh quotes a Tosfos and Brachos, where we see from there that everyone else disagrees with this Shibali Halakha. Tosfos and Brachos Daf Chafalef Amud Beis Zeriya Maskal Ad. He says as follows, and I brought this Tosfos because he brings in also Rashi sheet instead of having to see it separate. The cause of Rashi Besukkah Perek Lulav Hagazel. Rashi says in Sukkah Perek Lulav Hagazel, the Adam Hamispal V'Shama V'Piach Chazan Kaddish Kedusha. Right, the same exact situation the Shibali Halakha was speaking about. A person's in the middle of davening and he hears Kaddish and Kedusha. He can't stop to answer with a tzibor. But he just stops and listens and he's yotzei with shemei ka'ona. So Rashi holds you could do shemei ka'ona, even in a situation where you yourself cannot say it. V'yishlomar, and there are those that say, l'chachila in lasos kin, you shouldn't do it. Da'aniyah chashiva tvei hider mitzvah, because it's better to, this Yishlomer is not a disagreement with Rashi, it's really coming to explain a different Gemara over there where you shouldn't set yourself up in a situation, you shouldn't start davening in a situation where you know that you're going to have to be Yosef Shemei Kona, because it's just a b'diavad. L'chachila, you shouldn't do it. But in a situation where that's where you are in the middle of tefillah, so that's when Rashi says that you should stop and be Yosef Shemei Kona. Rabbeinu Tam v'Ri hayomrim, but the Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri, they say, the Adarabba, the opposite. If Shomei Ka'ona works, have a hafsakim shosek. So it would be considered a hefsek if you would stop. It's like as if you're talking in the middle of Shemona Esrei. However, the minig is to do like Rashi and gadol haminog, and therefore that's the way we would do. So what he wants to show from Tosfos is that not only does Rashi disagree with Shibali Halakha and says that you could do Shemei Ka'ona even in a situation where you're not allowed to actually speak, but even Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri would agree that Shemei Ka'ona would work. It's just that it would work so well it would be considered a hefsek. But everyone disagrees with the Shibah Halakha that says if you can't answer Kedusha, so then you cannot be Yotze Shemei Kona. Would seem from here that even someone that can't speak, right, maybe like a mute person, even though he can't say it, he could be Yotze with Shomei Kona. Now, he says that it's not a clear raya to the case of a mute person, because you might be able to say a chiluk. That in a situation where there's nothing really stopping him from speaking, except the halacha is he's not supposed to speak. So then we say he is someone who could speak, he could say Kedusha, but he's choosing, because of halachic reasons, to be Yotze with Shomea Ka'ona. So maybe that is different than a person who's mute and can't speak at all. Maybe in that case everyone would agree that we won't say Shomea Ka'ona because of the concept that we said before, Kol Harai Lebila, Ein Bila Ma'kev, that only a mincha that could be mixed is it not ma'akiv if you don't mix it. The Shagas Aryeh, he though comes out with a yesod. There's an important concept that he wants to say. There's a difference between the case of the mincha. In the case of a mincha, and the other cases that the Gemara brings this idea in regards to, is that the Torah tells you have to do something l'chachila, b'diavad it's not ma'akiv. So in such a situation where I have to do something l'chachila, but if I don't do it I'm still yotze, so in that situation we say, but you have to at least have the ability of doing it. As opposed to a situation like Shomei Ka'ona, where I have two options of how to be yotze the mitzvah. I could say it, or I could hear it. One is not necessarily l'chachila or b'diavad. It's not that I have to hear it, I have to say it. But if I don't say it and hear it, I'm yotze b'diavad. It doesn't work that way. There's two different ways I could be yotze the mitzvah. I could be yotze by speaking, I could be yotze by hearing. The fact that a mute person doesn't have the option of fulfilling the mitzvah in one way doesn't take away his ability to be yotze the mitzvah in the other way. I have two valid ways of being yotze the mitzvah. It's not like by a mincha. I have one way to do the mincha. I'm supposed to mix it. It's not ma'akiv. But there's only one way to do it, is to mix it. So if I don't mix it, b'diavad I'm yotze, but I was supposed to mix it, in that situation I have to at least, for sure have to be able to mix it, even b'diavad. But here, where I don't have to say it, I could just as easily hear it. So then the fact that I don't have the ability to say it doesn't affect my ability to be yotze by hearing. That's the chiluk of the Shagas Aryeh. And he brings a raya to this yesod. And this Gemara, it's very interesting. Like sometimes you read a Gemara and you think it has absolutely no application, in our situation. And you see from the Shagas Aryeh, we're going to be spending the rest of the night on this Gemara, how it applies to a mute person, right, which is a practical application, from a Gemara that seems to have no practical application, but from it we can learn to other sugyas. So it's always important when you learn Gemara, even though it seems like it has no practical application, you never know when you're going to be able to use it to bring a proof to something else. So we're going to speak now about what's the status of a person who's a half slave, half free person in regards to the halacha of blowing shofar. So we don't have slaves anymore, so you wouldn't think it's so applicable. But apparently it's going to teach us what to do if a person is mute and he can't say Kriya Shema. Tana Rabbanan, it's in Ma'ar Makom Zayin. We're in Rosh Hashanah, Chav Tesav and Aleph. Tana Rabbanan, HaKol Chayim T'kiyas Shofar, Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, Gerim Avadim Meshuchramim, Tumfim Androgenes. So everyone's chayiv to say Kriya Shema. In T'kiyas Shofar. And it gives a whole list of people. But what we're going to focus on is Mich Shechetyav Eved, V'Chetyav Ben Chorin, someone who's half slave and half free. I think we'll see the whole Bryce over here because it's important to understand these concepts to understand what we're going to do with the Chatzi Eved. Tumtum, Ino Motzi Loas Mino Loas Sheino Mino. A tumtum is someone who is born with a deformity that his genitals are completely inside his body, and you can't tell from the outside whether he is a male or a female. So he cannot be motze even another tumtum, because a woman is not chayiv in Kriya Shema, and he doesn't know what he is. It could be he's a woman, and another tumtum could be a male, and he would not be chayiv, and he'd be blowing for someone who is chayiv. So therefore he can't be motze even another tumtum. Androgynous, motzias mino, lo as sheinu mino. And androgynous is a person that's born with a deformity that he has both male and female genitals. And he can be motzi other people that are the same as him because they all are the same. Either they're all considered male, they're all considered female. We don't know what they're considered, but whatever they are, they're the same. So if they're considered female, so they're not chayiv at all. If they're considered male, so then they're male, and they could be motzi one another. He can't be motzi a regular male, because it could be that all androgynuses are female, and that would be a woman blowing for a man, and he would not be yotze. If he's half slave and half free, eino motzi lo es mino, lo es she'eino mino. He can't be motzi mino or eino mino. As he can't be motzi someone who's also a half slave like him, and he can't be motzi obviously a regular male. Now a slave has the same status as an isha, also is patur from Kriya Shema. So here he's half and half. So the Gemara continues later on the daf that Amar Rav Huna, which is the next line for us in the photocopy, that Amar Rav Huna says, Ula atzma motzi. He can be motzi himself. The half Eved, half Ben Chorin can blow for himself. Amar li Rav Nachman Rav Huna, and Rav Nachman said to Rav Huna, Mai shna la'achirim delo. Why do you think he can't blow for someone else? Delo asi tzad abdos umafik tzad chiras. It's because the half of him which is a slave, who's not chayiv in Tekiah Shofar, is going to be being motzi the man who is chayiv. La'atzmo nami, we're talking now, it sounds like he's really referring to another half slave, half free person. Right, so the blowing into the shofar is half slave and half free. But both of them together are blowing for another half Eved, and that half Eved, his half free part has to hear a kosher Tekiah. But part of what he's hearing is being blown by a half Eved, which is not chayiv mitzvahs. So therefore, even another half Eved can't be yotzi with his Tekiyos. If that's true, then la'atzmo nami, even he himself, lo asi tzad abdos didei, umafik tzad chiras didei. His half of him, which is a slave, can't be blowing for his half of him, which is a free person. Elamer of Nachman, so rather of Nachman says, Afla atzmeini motzi, he can't be motzi himself. Tani nami hachi, and the Brisa says the same thing. Misha chetziv av chetziv ben chorin, Afla atzmeini motzi. If a person's half slave, half free, he can't blow shofar for himself. So here we have a person, he can't blow shofar for himself, but he could be yotze shofar by hearing from someone else. Right? Because the Brisa gave a list of everyone that's chayiv. One of the people that's chayiv is a half slave. If he can't blow for himself, that means he's going to be yotzi by hearing the shofar from someone else. So we see from here that even a person that can't be yotzi by doing it himself could be yotzi with shomei ka'ona. And that would bring a proof to that which the Shaggos wants to say, that also a mute person can be yotzi Kriya Shema by hearing it from someone else, even though he himself can't say Kriya Shema, but he can be yotzi by hearing it from someone else. So now he's going to try to disprove this with a few disproofs, but in the end we're going to stick with it. So we're going to see what his disproofs are and go through them one by one. The first disproof is possibly that there's no chiyuv to blow the shofar at all. It says we say in the bracha, lishmoa kol shofar. The mitzvah is to hear the shofar. Is there a mitzvah to blow the shofar? It could be there's no mitzvah to blow the shofar at all. So the fact that he can't blow or could blow doesn't make the least bit of nafkamina for him being yotze by listening. It's not the same as Kriya Shema. By Kriya Shema, the mitzvah is to say Kriya Shema. You can be yotze saying, also by listening. When you hear the shofar, are you being yotze blowing the shofar? That's what you're doing? Is that really, I should be blowing the shofar, but I'll be yotze blowing the shofar by hearing someone else blow the shofar? Or do we say, no, there's no mitzvah to blow the shofar. The mitzvah is to hear the shofar. In which case, there's no reason why the Chatzi Eved should be any worse off because he can't blow it, because blowing is not the mitzvah. The truth is, many poskim do hold that way, but the Shaggos Aryeh says it's not true. He holds there is a mitzvah to blow the shofar. And this is really, could be a subject of a whole entire another shir, maybe we'll save it for Rosh Hashanah, of is there a mitzvah to blow the shofar or not. But the truth is, there are many halachos which do seem to apply that there's a mitzvah to blow as well. Why? As we've seen from this sugya, and is clear in also other sugyas, the person blowing the shofar has to be a bar chiyuva. Right? An Eved can't blow the shofar, as we said. Even a half Eved can't blow the shofar, a woman can't blow the shofar, a Chir Shot of a Kachan can't blow the shofar. Why can't they blow the shofar? If there's no mitzvah to blow, and you just have to hear the shofar, so as long as it's blown. Also, we know that there's the person blowing the shofar has to have kavana to be motzi the people that are listening. Right? What is he being motzi them? Are they just being yotzi themselves by hearing? So we see that there is also, even though we do seem to see that the mitzvah of shofar is hearing the shofar, it seems that blowing the shofar is also an integral part of the mitzvah that has to be done. That's part of the mitzvah, means I also have to blow the shofar and hear it. I don't have to blow it myself, I can have someone else blow it for me. Right? But it works the same way as any other Shemei Ka'ona, that when I hear the shofar, it's like I'm blowing it myself. Right? So therefore, he's going to stick with his raya. He brings a proof to this from a Tosfos. That's already on the second side of the pages of Maramakomos. Maramakom Ches Tosfos in Erchin Daf Gimel Amud Aleph Devrei Maskil Esui Nashim. He says over there Shechayavos Mikra Megillah. And so the Gemara over there is saying that everyone's chayav in Mikra Megillah. And who's everyone? Even women are chayav in Mikra Megillah. Shechayavos Mikra Megillah Uksherim Likros Lahutzi Zachar Midei Chovas and Lashnak Kuntris. Rashi says that they're chayiv to read the Megillah, and they can even be motzi men. Aval Bahag, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, Lo Pasakachi, he disagrees. Mavian Rayim and a Tosefta, he brings a raya from the Tosefta of Zelashon. Hakol chayiv mikra Megillah, Totav Androgenes chayiv ve'imotzi and Aramidei Chovasan. Right, it says in the Brisa over there by Megillah that a Totav Androgenes can't be motzi other people. Androgenes motzi mino, Androgynous can only be motzi other androgynuses, but not men. Tumtum ina motzi lo asmino v'asheino mino. A tumtum can't be motzi even another tumtum, as we explained, because maybe he's a female and the other tumtum's a male. Misha chetziv aved chesed ben chorin ina motzi lo asmino v'asheino mino. An eved that's half and half can't be motzi anyone. Right, all the same day, like we said by shofar. Nashim v'adam kutanim peturin mikriyas Megillah. And Nashim V'adam Ketanim, they're all part from Kriyas Megillah. Ad Kan Lashon Tosefta, that's what Tosefta says. Ba'alachos Gedolos Osifu El Shechayav Mishmiya. The Baal Halachos Gedolos says, but they're chayav to hear the Megillah. Lefisha Kol Hayu B'Safik L'Hashmer L'Argul Abid, because they were all included in the Safik of being wiped out by Haman. So therefore, when the Gemara in Erchin says that everyone's chayav in Mikra Megillah, even women, it means they're chayav to hear the Megillah. They're not chayav to say the Megillah. If they were chayav to say the Megillah, then they would be able to motzi men, like what Rashi says, but Tosefta says clearly not. So what do we see from this Tosfos? Is that it's not just a din by shofar, where we could say that there's a difference between hearing the shofar and blowing the shofar, and that there is no mitzvah to blow, the only mitzvah is to hear, right? Let's say we would say that the Shagas Aryeh said not like that. But if you wanted to say that chiluk wouldn't apply by Megillah. By Megillah, at least the men certainly have a chiyuv to read the Megillah. And what we're saying over here is that we have the same exact din, that the Eved, who is, or even Nashim according to the Bahag, they have a chiyuv to hear the Megillah, even though they can't read the Megillah themselves. Right? So they can't read the Megillah themselves, they can't be motzi other people. Sorry, maybe let's stick to the Chatzi Eved, because it could be maybe women could read for themselves, just not for men. But the Chatzi Eved Chatzi Ben Chorin, that case, where it says clearly in the Tosefta that Tosfos is bringing, that the Chatzi Eved Chatzi Ben Chorin has to hear the Megillah, but he can't read it for anybody, right, because the half of him, which is a Isha, can't read the Megillah, according to the Sheet of the Bahag. But the half of him that's free is chayiv like a man, to read the Megillah. But he can't read it, but he's still chayiv to hear it. And so we see from there that even by something where the chiyuv is to actually say it, you can still be yotzei with shomei ka'ona, even though you can't say it yourself. Now, he points out a Beis Yosef in Hilchas Megillah that he wants to say that really the Chatzi Eved Chatzi Ben Chorin by Megillah could be motzi himself. He just can't be motzi other people. And the reason is because Beis Yosef says that women could be motzi men. Right, so Beis Yosef is really holding like Rashi, women could be motzi men, and he wants to explain, he also wants to pass on like the Tosefta, that a Chatzi Eved can't be Motzi other people. Now, why is that true? If a woman can be Motzi a man, that means an Eved can be Motzi a man, because Eved has the same din as a Isha, so why can a half Eved not be Motzi a man? Why can't an androgynous be Motzi a man? Why can't a Tumtum be Motzi a man? Or if a woman can be Motzi a man, all these people which are either a suffix or a half and half, why can't they be Motzi a man? So he explains that, no, these types of people mentioned in the Tosefta are different because the way he says it, it has to be nicker, it has to be recognizable. Is he a man or is he a woman? And then if we know that he's a man or a woman, then he can Motzi other people. Someone that it's not clear what they are, or they're half and half, like a half slave and half free person, they can't be Motzi other people. The Shagged Aryeh does not understand what the Beis Yosef is talking about. Like, why in the world should that make a difference? If a man can be Motzi people and a woman can be Motzi people, so then why do we have to know whether it's a man or a woman? It doesn't really make a difference. So let it be half a man and half a woman, or that we don't know whether he's a man or a woman. Why should we have to know what svara is there that when it comes to reading the Megillah we should know whether he's a man or a woman, if there's no nafkamina between them? So he says, and it says also clear from Tosfos. Tosfos brought this Tosefta as the proof to the Bahag Shita that disagrees with Rashi. Rashi disagrees with the Tosefta. Why? Because the Tosefta said clearly that women are potter. And the Gemara said clearly that women are chayiv. So therefore, the Gemara doesn't hold this Tosefta. The Bahag is the one that wants to put it all together and say, no, women are chayiv to hear the Megillah, but they're not chayiv to read the Megillah, and he wants to therefore say there's no steer between the Gemara that says that they're chayiv, and the Tosefta says they're potter. But Rashi doesn't hold that way. Right, so the Beis Yosef is trying to put the two together, that we hold like Rashi that women are chayiv and can be motzi men, but together with the Tosefta that an androgynous and a tumtum can't, doesn't seem to work at all. It says he also brings that Rashi himself explains the reason why a tumtum cannot be motzi other people in Tikiyah Shofar is because it's a suffix whether he's a female. Rashi doesn't explain that a tumtum can never be motzi other people, because even in cases where women are chayiv, you have to be nicker, right? So Rashi himself, we see, by explaining the din of tumtum, is explaining it's because of the suffix. If you didn't have the suffix of the woman, because a woman would be chayiv as well, like by Mikra Megillah according to Rashi, so then there'd be no reason why a tumtum wouldn't be able to motzi other people. He also brings another raya from that which Rav Nachman said in the Gemara. Right, Rav Nachman had said in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Chavtes, right, he had said, Ma'ishna lachem delo, right, and la'atz munami lo. He said if he can't be motzi other people, if the half Eved can't be motzi other people, then he shouldn't be able to motzi himself. That goes against the Beis Yosef that says, no, it could be that you have to be nicker in order to be motzi other people. But motzi yourself, you could always be motzi yourself. So if that's true by Megillah, so how does Rav Nachman know that it can't be that way by Tikiyah Shofar? Because what we see from Rav Nachman is that the two go together. If you can't be motzi other people, you can't be motzi yourself either. Not like the way the Beis Yosef explains the din by Megillah. Okay, so that was one way that we tried to deflect the proof from Chatzi Eved, which, just to recap, because the part of the Beis Yosef was a little bit off, slightly off topic, and possibly confusing, is we wanted to say the Chatzi Eved, Chatzi ben Chorin, may not be a proof because it could be there is no chiyuv to blow the shofar at all. To which the Shagged Aryeh said, no, there is a chiyuv to blow the shofar, and he brought a proof also from Megillah where there is a chiyuv to read the Megillah, that nevertheless, even though he cannot say it himself, the Chatzi Eved, Chatzi ben Chorin, he can't say the Megillah himself, he can't blow the shofar himself, nevertheless, he can be yosef by hearing from someone else, and that would be the same din by the mute who wants to be yosef Kriya Shema. The second possibility of taking away our proof from the Chatzi Eved is maybe this whole concept of someone that's not chayiv, can't be motzi other people, is only d'Rabbanan. Right, the whole concept of the Chatzi Eved, we said, is since he can't be motzi since he can't be Yotze himself, since he's not chayiv, the half of him that's an Eved is not chayiv, so therefore he can't be motzi other people who are free, including his other half, which is free. Now, that concept might only be D'Rabbanan. Maybe D'Oraisa, he could be motzi. And that's why he has a chiyuv to hear the shofar, because D'Oraisa, he really has a chiyuv to blow the shofar. Chazal came and made this rule, that he can't blow the shofar himself. But that won't take away his chiyuv D'Oraisa. On a D'Oraisa level, he is fit to blow the shofar, and therefore he is fit to hear the shofar. Chazal took away from him the ability to blow, but didn't take away from him the ability to hear. That would be much different than a mute person who cannot say Kriya Shema. Right, so it's not like he could say Kriya Shema D'Oraisa, but just not D'Rabbanan, and therefore he should hear from someone else, like the Chatzi Aved. He physically can't say Kriya Shema, so maybe he also is not going to be able to hear Kriya Shema B'Yotze. If we would say that this is true, this idea that Mi She'eno Chayev V'Davar is not able to motzi someone else is only a D'Rabbanan. Maybe we say that, maybe we don't. So he brings that it's actually a Machlokes Rishonim. Machlokes Rashi Tosos in Barachos Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph. We'll quickly see the one line in the Gemara. Hachi Amar Rav Chia bar Ava, Amar Rav Yehuda, probably Rav Yochanan actually. Lo Lamein Motzias Rabbi De Chavasa Nash Yochel Kazayis Dagan. That you can't be motzi other people in Birchas Hamazon, Bracha Achrona, unless you eat a kazayas of grain. After you eat a kazayas of grain, then you could be motzi other people. Rashi points out, kazayas dagan, b'chi achol kazayas dagan miha mafik. But if he eat a kazayas, he could be motzi other people. Afal gav de kazayas dagan shiur derabanan hu. Even though a person that eats a kazayas is only chayev bracha achrona midrabanan, Kidar Parak Misha Meso, as we say over there. Mihu, Kevad Mechayev Midrabanan, Mechuyev B'Davar Krina Bay, Umotzi Ramidei Chovasam. Since he's Chayev D'Rabanan to bench, he can be motzi someone who's Chayev even D'Oraisa to bench. Right? We know that the pasuk says, V'achalta v'savata, uveirachta. That when you eat and you're full, then you're Chayev in Birchas Hamazon. If you're not full, you're not Chayev, D'Oraisa. Midrabanan, as soon as you eat a kazayas, you're chayiv to bench. Here we have a person, he ate only kazayas, and he could already be motzi other people, but he himself's not chayiv. How can someone who's not chayiv be motzi someone else? Rashi says it's okay, because he's chayiv midrabanan. Tosus asks on him, Ad sheyochel kazayas dagan, mashra shem ochel kazayas dagan, sheyochel hotziaf acherim, sheochel al sova. If you eat a kazayas, he can be motzi other people, even who are full. The tema, it's a wonder of Ari, because I say no chayav midrabanan. The heichi aser rabbanan patra d'oraisa. The harmina perik misha mezu tovim aral misha yishto. Sorry, that's already a continuation, which is we're not going to continue the rest of that sentence. So To's asking, how could someone who's only chayav d'oraisa patra someone's d'rabbanan? He's bothered by this question. If he's not chayav d'oraisa, so he's misha inu chayav b'davar on a d'oraisa level, how can he be motzi someone else their chiyuv? So therefore, Tosos writes, Ubahag Pirish, this is a continuation of the Tosos. The echad she'achlu kazayis inu yochel te'achem she'achlu kedei sivia. The lo asider rabbanan d'oraisa. The Bahag says in a chanami, you can't be motzi other people. If you only eat a kazayis and are chayiv d'rabbanan, you can't be motzi someone who is full and is chayiv d'oraisa. El kishlo achlu gam achira kazayis poter asam. The whole Gemara is only talking about a case where everyone only ate a kazayis. Tosos himself says below it's not true. Because we're relying on the story, which is the story in the Gemara there before the statement, where it was Yanai was eating with his friends. They ate a full meal. And Shimon ben Shetach pater them. He only drank wine, but the Gemara says you really have to eat a kazayis dagan. We hold you have to eat kazayis dagan. But it seems clear that the kazayis, even though he's only chayiv d'Rabbanan, which means on a d'oraisa level he's not chayiv, can be motzi someone else who's chayiv. So how does that work? So Rashi wasn't bothered by that, right? So the Shagasari wants to point out Rashi, who wasn't bothered, must hold that really on a d'oraisa level you can be motzi someone even if you're not chayiv. Chazal put in a rule that you have to be chayiv in order to be motzi someone else. So if you're chayiv d'Rabbanan, that's good enough. Tosos is very bothered by this. The Bahag is very bothered by this. And therefore he wants to say that from Tosos and Bahag we see that no. In order to be motzi someone on a d'oraisa level even, you have to be chayiv. If you're not chayiv, so you can't be motzi someone else. That's a rule d'oraisa. The fact that you're chayiv d'Rabbanan is not going to help you for the d'oraisa din. Right? On the d'oraisa level, you're not chayiv, and it's a din d'oraisa you have to be chayiv. So then you can't be motzi someone else. Tosfos has a different explanation, and he says that Elanir l'chalik de katan sheino barchi of klal d'oraisa afilu achal kedei svia hilchach einu mechuyev b'davar krina bei u'lkach lo mafiklei. A katan who's never chayiv d'oraisa, so he's never going to be able to be motzi someone else their chiyuv. If the other person needs a shir d'oraisa. Aval gadol shu bar chiyuv in Torah hi achal svia mechuyev b'davar krina bei. However, a gadol that if he were to eat the kedei svia, he'd be chayiv. He's considered mechuyev b'davar. Afilu achal klal, even if he didn't eat at all. Kedai Rosh Hashanah, as we say in Rosh Hashanah, klal brachas aval bisha yatsa motzi. You could be motzi someone else, any brachos, even if you were already yotze. So you're not chayiv anymore. You can still be motzi someone else their brachos. Right? You already heard Tekiyah Shofar. You can still be motzi someone else Tekiyah Shofar and make the brachos for them. Because you are a mechuyev b'davar. You're not like an isha who's not chayiv in Tekiyah Shofar. You happen to be yotze already. So you can still be motzi other people. And the reason is because we say Kol Yisrael Araven Zebazeh. Same thing by benching. Even if you already yotze, you already benched, you could bench for someone else. Get appreciates as we explained. The only reason why our Gemara says anything about eating a kazayis is because part of being motzi someone else and benching, if you're going to do it as part of a zimun, which is what the Gemara there is speaking about, is you say bar shachal mishalo, that we ate. You can't say we ate if you didn't eat. So you have to eat. But as far as the din of being motzi someone their chiyuv, you are considered a mechuyev b'davar if you're the type of person who's chayiv. It doesn't matter whether you're actually chayiv right now. So therefore, just like by Tekiyah Shofar, you could blow for someone else if you already blew. You could read the Megillah for someone else if you already heard Megillah. You could also bench for someone else even if you didn't eat. Right? So the whole Gemara is not talking about that concept. But, as we pointed out, as a very interesting idea in regards to benching for someone else, but what we're trying to pull out from this Tosfos to our situation is that Tosfos and the Bahag take very seriously this idea of if you're not chayiv, you can't be motzi. It's a d'oraisa din. If you're not chayiv, you can't be motzi. So being chayiv d'Rabbanan doesn't help you for that din. And therefore what? Therefore, this dichui that we wanted to say, that perhaps the Chatzi Eved, Chatzi ben Chorin, the reason why he is chayiv to hear the shofar is because he really, d'oraisa, could blow. It's not true. Really, d'oraisa, he can't blow because he's not considered mechuyev b'davar. That half. And that psul of not being mechuyev is a psul d'oraisa, according to Tosfos and according to the Bahag. And he brings a very clear raya to Tosfos from the Gemara and Brachos Daf Chaf Amud Beis. It's very clear this is a din d'oraisa. It says in the Mar Makom Yud, Amrli Ravina Rava, Nashim b'birchas hamazon d'oraisa d'Rabbanan. Are women chayiv to bench d'oraisa d'Rabbanan? Lamai nafkamina. What's the difference? Lafuhi ramadei chovasan. Can they be motzi other people? I amr d'oraisa, asi d'oraisa, mafu d'oraisa. If they're d'oraisa, chayiv women, so they could be motzi men. I amr d'Rabbanan. If they're only chayiv d'Rabbanan, havi she'ena mechuyev b'davar. It's she'ena mechuyev b'davar. V'chol she'ena mechuyev b'davar in motzi is ramadei chovasan. If you're not chayiv, you can't be motzi other people, even though they're chayiv d'Rabbanan. Right, so this goes against what Rashi said by the Birchas Hamazon, that someone that ate a kazayis and is chayiv d'Rabbanan could be motzi someone that's chayiv d'oraisa. It's clear from the Gemara in Brachos by the woman by Birchas Hamazon that if her chiyuv was only d'Rabbanan, she would not be able to motzi a man. She would be considered eno mechuyev b'davar. So that's a raya to Shitas Tosfos, and therefore the Shagas Aryeh goes with this, that we hold like Tosfos, and therefore this is a complete soul being not mechuyev b'davar. Therefore, the Chatzi Eved on a d'oraisa level can't blow shofar. Nevertheless, we let him hear the shofar. So that is a valid proof to what we said about the mute. Another possible disproof from the case of Chatzi Eved, Chatzi ben Chorin, is maybe a Chatzi Eved isn't really chayiv to hear shofar at all. Why would that be true? Right? If he's half free and half a slave. Sorry, the other way around. Not that he's not chayiv. he is chayiv like a full man. We don't view him like he's half not chayiv. Really, on a d'oraisa level, he's fully chayiv in Tikiyah shofar, and therefore could blow the shofar. It's just a din d'Rabbanan that we don't let him blow. Why would we want to say that? It's based on a Gemara in Chagiga. The Gemara in Chagiga daf Beis Amud Aleph, one of this first Gemara actually in Chagiga, that it says over there, Os Yud Aleph in the Mara Makomos, Hakol Asuyei Mai. We say everyone is chayiv to the Ola Regel. Who's that including? Including someone that's half slave and half free. According to Ravina, that says someone that's half a slave and half free is potter from being Ola Regel. So what are we going to include? Now the reason why Ravina would potter him is because it says that you go to Ola Regel and you greet your master, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Shechina is dwelling in the Beis HaMikdash. Someone who has another master, like a slave, is going to be potter. He's excluded from that pasuk because he's a different master. If he's a half slave, so he also has, half of him has a different master, so he's potter. So the Gemara goes through some answers, alternative answers, and it gets back to, which is on the top of the next column, Iba Yisema, La'olam Kedar Meikara. Really, it's like we said before. In other words, that we're talking about a Chatzi Eved Chatzi Ben Chorin is Chayiv in Aliyas HaRegel. When you ask about Ravina, it says that he's potter, lo kash, it's not a question. Kan Commissioner Rishon and Kan Commissioner Achrona. There's two versions. One, an earlier Mishnah, and then later the halacha changed. Ditchnan, as the Mishnah says, Misha Chetziv Eved Chetziv Ben Chorin, a person who's a half slave and half free, Ovidus Rabbi Yom Echad, Ves Aspi Yom Echad. He serves himself one day and his master one day. Divrei Beis Hillel. That's what Beis Hillel says. Amar have Beishami. Beishami said to them, Tekantem es Rabbo, Ves Asmo Tekantem. You fix the master, as the master gets his half of the slave, but you didn't really help the half of the slave that's free. Because Lisa Shivcha Yinu Yachal, he can't marry a Shivcha because half of him is free. A freed slave is not allowed to marry a Shivcha. Bas Chorin Yinu Yachal, he can't marry a Bas Yisrael, because a Bas Yisrael can't marry the half of him who's an Eved. Li Batal, for him not to get married at all, Balolo Nivra Olam Ela Pivirivia, the whole world is created for Puruvu. Shenamar Lo Tohu Bara L'Shavs Yitzhar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not create the world to be desolate, he created it to be inhabited. Elo Ifnei Tikun HaOlam Kofanis Rabbav Ososo Ben Chorin, Bekosiv Lo Shtar Chetzi Damav, rather Beishamai says you force the master to free him, and the slave will be chayiv to the master for half of his value. Right? So the master's not going to lose out monetarily, but we force him to free the slave. So now the slave can be fully free and marry. V'chazu Beis Hillel, L'horz Kedrei Beishamai. Beis Hillel, he ended up agreeing to this svara of Beis Shammai. So what it comes out is Beis Hillel originally held that there is such a thing as a half slave, half free person. And the maskana is there really is no such thing. Because even though technically he might be half free and half slave right this second, but that's just until Beis Din comes around and forces him to free the whole slave. So halachically he turns into someone who's really free, according to the Mishnah Achrona. Now, he doesn't yet have the get shikhr, right? The master didn't actually free him yet, but he's omed to be freed. He's ready to be freed, and therefore he doesn't have the full status of a half slave the way we would think up until now. So therefore, even though a half slave generally we would say is potter from being Ola Regel because he has another master, this half slave, l'halacha, according to the Mishnah Achrona, doesn't have another master. Because he technically has a master, but that master has no control over him because Beis Din is forcing that master to free him. That's the way most folks will explain this Gemara. The Rambam has a different explanation of the Gemara, but all the other Rishonim explain it the way we just explained. So therefore, you could say that a half slave, when it comes to Tikiyas Shofar, what is his din? Really, it's like he's completely free, because the master is forced to free him. So he doesn't have any other master. And therefore, he should be able to blow the shofar and hear the shofar. Maybe Chazal, since he is a little bit like a slave, because he didn't yet get freed, so maybe Chazal said it's better he shouldn't blow the shofar for himself and for other people. But d'oraisa he could. And d'oraisa, therefore, he can also be yotzei by hearing the shofar. As opposed to, right, this would be our dichui, as opposed to a mute person who cannot say Kriya Shema, maybe cannot be yotzei by hearing it from someone else. So what does he say? So he wants to say that it doesn't seem that that's what the Gemara is referring to, according to the Shita of Rav Nachman. Because again, Rav Nachman, he said we're going here with very straightforward svara. We already quoted it twice, I'll quote it again. Rav Nachman said, if the Chatzi Eved can't blow for other people, a different Chatzi Eved, then he obviously can't blow for himself either. Right? Rav Nachman took that as a davar pashut. So if we're just saying that, well, really he could blow, just Chazal put on some sort of takana, just because he doesn't look 100% like he's free. So maybe they just put on the takana, he can't blow for other people, maybe for himself he could. How does Rav Nachman know with such certainty if he can't blow for other people, then he can't blow for himself? It must be that Rav Nachman is understanding the reason why he can't blow for other people is a real din, a din d'oraisa, since half of him is not mechuyev b'davar. So in other words, we're not going with this Mishnah Achrona idea that a half slave is if he's already freed. So how does it work though? Because we do have this Mishnah Achrona that a half slave is considered, in regards to Ola L'Regel, Aliyah L'Regel, he's considered 100% free. How come by Tkiyah Shofar not? How come by Tkiyah Shofar not? So he explains that Tosfos in Gittin explains this. And let's see this Gemara quickly in Mem Beis Amud Aleph and the Tosfos on it, that it says over there, we're talking about a half slave. Nalchu shor yom shel rabo l'rabo yom shel atzmo l'atzmo. If a shor gores him, right, damages the slave. So if it's the day that he's working for his master, so then the damages goes to his master. If he was gored on a day where he was working for himself, so then he gets the money. Tosfos explains, Hainu l'mishnah achrona, Rishona, that only works according to the Mishnah Rishona, that there's such a thing as a half slave that's still working for his master. The Mishnah Achrona, Maisi Yadav Shalo. But according to the Mishnah Achrona, he keeps all of his work. He never works for another master, because Bezin just forces the master to free him. Because we compare him to a case of a mokum get shikhr. However, there's an afkamina even according to the Mishnah Achrona. For example, Yisomim Ketanim, that we don't force them. That which we say we force a person to free the other half of the slave is only in a situation where he's a gadol, the owner. So therefore, we take him to Beis and we make him do what we want him to do. But a katan, we don't take him to Beis in generally. And therefore, if the katan owns the other half of this slave, so then we would not force him to free him. And then he'd have the regular din of a half slave that we find all over the place. And another case would be perhaps a shifcha. We don't need to get into that. But there could be other cases also where we wouldn't force him to free him. So therefore, even according to the Mishnah Achrona, there are going to be cases of half slaves. And that Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which is telling us what do we do with a half slave. The Gemara, the Tosefta in Megillah, which discusses what we do with a half slave. It's not talking about the half slave where we're forcing the owner to free him, because there he's considered a completely free person, like we said by Chagiga, in the Gemara in Chagiga. As we talk about a situation where we're not freeing him. If it's talking about a situation where we're not freeing him, so that means he really is a half slave. And that half slave is a mechuyev b'davar. Let me go back that our proof stands. Now the truth is, this Tosfos itself is difficult, and I don't necessarily have an answer to it. The Tosfos is difficult because the Gemara in Chagiga, if you remember, brought the Hakol Chayam B'Riyah to include a half slave. Ravina says a half slave is potter, and we said we could reconcile it by saying one's according to the Mishnah Rishon and one's according to the Mishnah Achrona. And the truth is we have this type of Gemara in other places in Shas as well, that we have some sort of stira between the din of a half slave, and we answer that one's according to the Mishnah Rishon and one's according to the Mishnah Achrona. According to what Tosfos just said, you don't have to answer that one of them is according to Mishnah Rishon we don't hold like. You can say they're both according to the Mishnah Achrona, but one of them is talking about a case where it belongs to a katan, and we're not forcing him to free the slave, and therefore the slave is still considered a Chatzi Eved. Why does the Gemara never offer that explanation the way Tosfos does? And again, over here, the Shaggad says that he answers this question in the Sefer Klal Torah Mitzvos you don't have. So I can't tell you exactly what the answer is. The Shaggad claims that there's an answer to this question against Tosfos. The truth is that when I was learning the sugya in Rosh Hashanah, so the way I remember it coming out, I looked over there in my notes and I saw that there are in fact many Mefarshim that explain this. They explain completely differently than the Shaggad Aryeh. The Shaggad Aryeh understood that a half slave and half free person has the same din for all dinim. Either he's considered like partially a slave or he considers like he's free. Since the Mishnah Achrona holds he's considered free for the case of, let's say, where the shor gores him, for the case of Chagiga, so that means he's considered like he's completely free also for, let's say, Tekiah Shofar. But you don't have to say that, because as we explained, he is free in as much as he doesn't have to work for anybody, because Beis Din is going to force the master to free him. But the master hasn't yet freed him, so you could very easily say that in regards to Dinei Mamanis, he's not working for anybody else. Right? So therefore you don't have this whole case of the Shor Shenagcho. That's why Tosas explains something from the Mishnah Mishona, because we're saying if the Shor gores him in a day, he's working for another master. He's not working for another master. And by Chagiga, the whole reason why a slave would be pater from Aliyah L'Regel is because he has another master that he has to work for, but he doesn't L'maisa have to work for another master, because Beis Din is forcing the master to free him. But when it comes to what is his status like a free person, halachically? No, we would still view him that he's half an Eved, as far as his status. And therefore when it comes to Kiyah Shofar, where an Eved is pater, so half of him is pater. Right? The fact that he doesn't ever have to work for another master again doesn't change his intrinsic status. It'll change the din by Re'iyah, Ola Regel, because that's totally on, does he have to work for another master? It'll change his din in regards to Nazikin, because that's totally on when he's working for another master. But it's not going to change whether he is considered like a male or a female in regards to mitzvahs. That's going to only kick in when the master actually frees him. Therefore, we wouldn't necessarily have all these problems that the Shagas Aryeh is getting himself into. So I think we're almost finished here. We just have one more raya that the Shagas Aryeh wants to bring for the mute person from the dinim of shchita. And the Rambam says in Hilchos Shchita, Perek Daled Halacha Tes, Mumcha Shenishtatik, a person that knows how to shecht, but he's nishtatik, he can't speak, very hu mevin v'shomea, but he understands and he can hear, v'daitu nechona, and he has proper das, and knows he's not a shota, hariza shochi l'chachila he can shecht. Umisha inu shomea, but if he can't hear, hariza shochi, he can shecht, but not l'chachila, because he's not going to be able to be yotzei the bracha. Now we see from here that the mute person, though, he can shecht l'chachila. If you can't hear the bracha, we said you can't shecht l'chachila, because you're supposed to shecht with a bracha. So how can the mute person who can't make a bracha, how can he shecht l'chachila? It must be he can shecht l'chachila if he hears the bracha from someone else. So you see from the Rambam, even if you can't say the bracha, you can still be yotzei with someone else's bracha. Now this is not a complete raya for the sheet of the Shagas Aryeh, because we explained before, the Rambam himself holds that by all other brachos, you can even think the bracha. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he's hearing the bracha from someone else. It could be the Rambam is lishitaso, that he's thinking the bracha, and that's how the mute person can shecht. But everyone else that holds that a mute person can't think the bracha, maybe you wouldn't be able to shecht l'chachila. But he brings a proof in the fact that the Tur in Yeridea passes like this Rambam. The Tur says, we have quoted in Maramalchim Yudalad, Chirish HaMedaber V'Eino Shomea, a deaf person that can speak, Afal Pi Shemedaber L'chachila Yishkot. I have a little typo I made over here. It's supposed to be l'chachila. Right? Even though he can speak, he can't shech l'chachila v'nei she'eino shomea bracha, because he doesn't hear the bracha. And you're not allowed to do a mitzvah l'chachila if you can't hear the bracha. V'ashomea v'eino medaber, but someone that can hear and not speak, imhu mumcha, if he's an expert, shochet afil l'chachila im acher mevarech. He can shech l'chachila if someone else makes the bracha and he can hear, not by thinking the bracha, because the Torah doesn't hold like the Rambam that you're allowed to think a bracha. The only way the mute person can be yotzei the bracha is by hearing someone else. And the Torah says that's good, l'chachila. Even though he himself can't make the bracha, he can be yotzei l'shomei va'ona. And we see clearly from the next Maramakom that the Torah holds that thinking a bracha doesn't help. It says, v'tzarech hashmil azav, this is a Torah in regards to the halacha of benching, berachas hamazon. He has to tzarech hashmil azam. He has to be able to hear it. Mashavos yosasav. That's what he speaks. Umio, however, em lo hashmil aznav. If he can't hear it, yatsa he's yotzei Ubilvad sheyotzi b'svasav, as long as he does say it out. But he has to say it. It doesn't have to be loud enough for him to hear it, b'diavad, but he has to say it. If he doesn't say it and he just thinks it, he's not yotzei berachas hamazon, even b'diavad. Berachas hamazon is not one of the things where it says in the pasuk, the lashon of dibor. Right, so therefore we see the Torah does not hold like the Rambam. You can't be yotzei any brachos just by thinking it. Nevertheless, he agrees with the Rambam that a mute person can shech lichachila by hearing the brachos of someone else. We see that the Torah holds that even though a mute person can't say the brachos himself, he can still be yotzei shemiyah va'onech, and this would be a clear proof to the sheet of the Shagas Aryeh that a mute person, even though he can't say Kriya Shema, he could be yotzei with shemiyah kona, which means he has to be yotzei with shemiyah kona. He has a chiyuv of Kriya Shema, and he has to be yotzei it by hearing it from someone else. Okay, we'll stop here.